So David Eby wanted a pipeline veto. Well, the rest of Canada told him to sit down and behave. Remember, for months, Eby acted as though a new Alberta to Pacific pipeline would happen only with British Columbia's permission. Strong words. One problem. Then came the rather embarrassing admission. He didn't have the authority to stop a new pipeline. In fact, his government won't even challenge it in court. But here's where this becomes almost farcical. The same premier demanding that Ottawa respect British Columbia's authority has spent years of his term expanding Indigenous participation in decisions over Crown land and resources, shared decision-making, consent agreements, recognition of Indigenous jurisdiction. So Eby wants more sovereignty when he's dealing with Ottawa, but he's quite open to sharing sovereignty when governing BC. I don't know about you, but I don't recall anybody electing a second government to help govern British Columbia. Nobody that I can recall voted to become junior partners in their own province. David Eby wants to be that gatekeeper. Turns out, there's not even a gate. But if you think this is simply another fight over a pipeline, you're missing the much larger implication. This is about who is actually going to govern British Columbia. In 2019, BC became the first province in Canada to pass legislation implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We call it UNDRIP. That legislation was far more than an apology. It created a framework through which the province can enter into agreements with Indigenous governing bodies and allow them to exercise statutory decision-making power. Maybe listen to that again. It created a framework through which the province can enter into agreements with Indigenous governing bodies, invoking the exercise of statutory decision-making power. I'm going to say it again. Decision-making power. And the government's own language describes both statutory and non-statutory forms of shared decision-making. Regardless of where you stand on this whole farce we call reconciliation, that should be of significant concern to every single British Columbian. And I think it goes without saying that many home-owning British Columbians are justly and rightly concerned already. Reconciliation is one thing. I, for one, would vastly prefer to get along with my neighbors. But political authority is something else entirely. We elect one provincial legislature. We elect one provincial government. And every citizen, Indigenous or otherwise, gets to participate, or at least have the opportunity to participate in that democratic process. So if we're moving beyond consultation and towards shared government decision-making authority on the basis of Indigenous governance, Canadians are at least entitled to ask a very, very uncomfortable question. At what point did we get to vote for this? I don't remember the referendum. I don't remember anybody being asked anything. I don't remember an election being contested explicitly on whether government authority over British Columbia should be fundamentally changed. And I certainly don't remember British Columbians agreeing that questioning this transformation made them opponents of reconciliation, which is certainly the narrative being spun by certain interest groups. And that is exactly the rhetorical trick that has protected this conversation since 2019. If you oppose it, you're racist, you're a bigot, you oppose reconciliation. Question the policy, you're against reconciliation. Question land transfers, you're against reconciliation. Questions about shared decision making, apparently, you're also against reconciliation. I disagree, vehemently. You can support reconciliation while still believing that government authority belongs to the people who elect the government. This brings us back to David Eby, the spineless wonder himself. When Ottawa exercises authority David Eby doesn't like, Suddenly, provincial autonomy is sacred. British Columbians must be heard. British Columbia must consent. British Columbia's jurisdiction must be protected. But when his own government negotiates arrangements for exercising authority within British Columbia, suddenly power sharing becomes enlightened governance. You don't get to have it both ways. Either democratic authority matters, and matters a lot, or it doesn't. Either British Columbians have a legitimate interest in who exercises governmental power over their province, or they don't. And if David Eby believes that this transformation is necessary, then stop hiding it behind euphemisms. Explain it, defend it, put the scale of it plainly before British Columbians. And then, in the spirit of democracy, let British Columbians decide en masse if this is the future that they want. Real reconciliation should survive scrutiny. Good policy should survive scrutiny. And fundamental changes to political authority should demand more public scrutiny, not less. David Eby went looking for a veto over pipelines. Discovered Canada didn't need to give him one. Perhaps it's time British Columbians started asking a much more important question. How much of our own government's authority does David Eby intend to share? And who's giving him permission to do it?